How to have an intuition, according to Henri Bergson. Start with the perception of movement. Experience it rather than think about it or simply imagining it in the mind's eye. Notice if you are really grasping it or taking it in. I'm only catching sight of its effect and what it's leaving behind as it slips past me. It slips through my fingers, and I am nevertheless sure that I'm aware of something, even if it's something that flees as I approach and escapes my clutches. Try again to see the motion itself, see the movement, this undoing of the actual, this slipping past our notice. What is this image of motion? Clearly, we can get this derivative image of movement as what is past, as what is already achieved by the movement as it occurs. But this is what is left behind after the movement and not the movement itself. It is the movement as completed, but it is not the movement itself in its complete reality. It is derivative. Try to appreciate this complete original whole of the movement, which cannot be captured in a picture or a snapshot. What is this moving image? Can our perception of movement be more than noticing one part replace another part in a succession? If we are to get at this original or integral image of movement, it must always be overflowing the actual and the derivative, making or undoing them in a succession, but one in which each making and undoing has no gap from all of the others. Here is how Henri Bergson himself described it in his 1903 to 1904 course on the history of the theories of memory at the Collège de France. This movement of the mobile is in itself elusive, at least through these operations of knowledge. Does that mean it cannot be grasped? Does it mean that we do not know movement? Yes, we do know it, but by an entirely different operation than that one, by a completely different process. When we say that we know movement as mobility, it is because we appeal to an absolutely new method of knowledge. It is because we can produce movements ourselves. We can move ourselves, and we are inwardly conscious of it. And this movement that we produce ourselves, we can project it outside of us. By placing ourselves in thought inside the mobile, we can perceive in it, grasp in it, what we grasp in ourselves. Then we have inner knowledge of movement, of action. But it is through an operation, how shall we say? An operation of intellectual sympathy, as we said last year. It is something completely different. What is the difference between this operation by which one transports oneself inside the mobile to somehow coincide with its mobility and its action, and the operation by which one places oneself outside of it to follow it from position to position, and by an addition, a juxtaposition of positions to each other to reconstitute it? This difference is fundamental. In the second case, which is that of usual and scientific knowledge, one takes from the movement which has left in space immobile traces, deposits, so to speak, residues. We talk about solid residues, and with these residues as elements, we seek to reconstitute the movement. We do not recompose it. We recompose an approximate imitation of the movement, an approximation that can be pushed as far as one wants, but it is only an imitation. To grasp movement in itself, it is necessary to resort to a mode of knowledge in which, by abstracting from this reconstruction and disengaging from it, one tries instead to place oneself in the very movement as it occurs. This second operation we have called intuition. And then the one that leads to artificial recomposition, to the approached movement, to the approximated imitation, a practical equivalent, one might say, of the thing. We have called this analysis. We've said that analysis was the usual method of knowledge, one might say, normal for extra-philosophical knowledge. because it is not absolutely normal to philosophize. Analysis is the usual method of knowledge. In contrast, intuition would be the essentially philosophical method, but it is not a natural effort. It is an effort that goes against the slope of nature. What is natural, what is the direction of nature, is to seek things made and not things in the making, to grasp immobilities and not movements, and to represent even movement, even action, by compositions and juxtaposition of its stable elements, as if solidifying them with one another. In order to get an intuition, to have an intuition, to achieve an intuition, we might say, we need a long comradeship with the real, a long comradeship with movement in its integral reality, in its complete reality, which exceeds our ability to represent it or conceptualize it. And continuing with the lecture I was just quoting, this intuition of which we spoke, and which would be the preeminent method of philosophy, is not something of which we have no idea in everyday life, although it is not the usual mode of knowledge. This intuition, we have it, or at least we sketch it in the case where we have the intimate, profound, and as if complete knowledge of any object whatsoever. Let's take the knowledge, one might say, the most complete possible among usual knowledge, the knowledge of a mother for their child. There are mothers who never run out of anecdotes, stories about their child, who recount 1,001 things about them. But there are others who say nothing, because they know very well that they will never manage to say exactly and completely what they perceive, what they know. I do not say that they always know their child in the same sense that this word sometimes is used to mean. They can be mistaken in the appreciation of their child, that is, in the comparison between the child and other children, or between the child and this or that ideal that one should propose. This is possible, but this knowledge can still be said to be integral. It is generally integral. This knowledge, what is it? It is not something complicated. It is something so simple, on the contrary, that no word could express it. No word would be simple enough to express it. It is, one might say, the form of a soul, the spiritual contour, the contour of the spirit. And even the word contour would not be adequate, because it signifies something completed. Something that is, how shall we put it, effected. Whereas what I am talking about is something that is being done in action. It's a moving and elusive contour. It is therefore something very subtle and so difficult to express that if one started to use words, one will never finish, because one will have to circle around and take every possible external vantage point on the thing, and there will be an infinite number of them, for no matter how closely these viewpoints are taken, there will always be possible intermediary viewpoints. That's why, as soon as one begins to express this thing, one is never finished. But in the inexpressible form, the thing is complete, integral. This is a case of intuition, of knowledge without words. As soon as words come, it will be analysis, science, description, anecdotes, ways of making known what one feels, but the description will never be finished, never complete. Here is a simple example. We could find others if we studied aesthetics with the masters, with those who created, who have tried to give an idea of what artistic creation is. There's a page from Leonardo da Vinci in one of his teachings on painting, which Ravison liked to cite, and which is very remarkable. Leonardo da Vinci tells us that the object of art is to represent life. This is certain. All artists have said it. Life above all, and then afterwards, this is already a remarkable idea. He says that what characterizes life is a wavy form, a serpentine form. He adds this. That what distinguishes living beings, one living being from another, is its own way of serpentine movement. each being has its own serpentine movement. The goal of art would be to render this serpentine movement. What did he mean by that? He explains it. He means that when one takes the human physiognomy, the face, the head of the model, for example, there are first the lines one sees, then there is something else. There is the line one does not see, which is a mental thing. He said it is a matter of the spirit. This is not seen with the eye, it is seen with the spirit. And this line is in some way the generative line. It is not truly a line, it is a movement. It is the generative movement of the lines of the figure. Something very simple, extremely simple, but elusive. So elusive that the artist cannot fix it, cannot hold it long under the gaze of his mind. And yet, it is this that gives the key to everything. And when the artist holds this something, this je ne sais quoi, from which everything else proceeds, he holds in some way the resemblance, the very essence of his portrait. Well, I would say that the artist who would make his portrait by measurements, it can be done like this, who would take measurements and transfer them onto the canvas, who would render the figure detail after detail. This artist, taking the thing from the outside, would do something like what we call analysis. He would proceed by analysis. He could arrive at resemblance, and an increasingly complete resemblance. It will be an increasing approximation. But the great artist, the artist of genius, I believe, is the one who will proceed in the manner of Leonardo. That's to say, the one who, studying his model deeply at a given moment, sees the generative axis, the generative line of the movement from which everything proceeds and which could be expressed, he says, on the canvas, no more by lines than by words, which nevertheless give the key to everything, which is the source, the origin of everything. This is intuition. Here, then, are the two methods that we have taken and opposed to each other, and of which we find examples in everyday life, and the description and use by great artists. It is by these two methods of different sense and opposite direction that we have defined, on the one hand, scientific knowledge, and on the other hand, philosophical knowledge. I've just borrowed examples from art. I do not mean by this that philosophy is art. No, it is not at all the same thing. There is always this fundamental, crucial difference between the method of philosophy and that of the artist. That the artist, as Leonardo da Vinci says, always seeks to render individuals. The intuition I cited earlier sought something individual, whereas philosophical, metaphysical intuition deals with a whole category of things, with genres. The philosopher will not ask himself, assuming the question had any meaning, what is the essence of this or that physiognomy, and seek to give an intuition of it. But on the big problems, the problems of matter, of the organization of consciousness, on these great general problems, these are the intuitions that the philosopher must seek above all, rather than the results of analysis. That's what we were saying. One must seek intuition, but how? What will be the method? We have defined it. We have tried to say something about it, to give some examples. The method is twofold. It includes two phases. First, the study and critique of analysis, and then a recourse to the history of philosophy, a study of the evolution of doctrines. So, 2 points: critique of analysis and the history of systems. The analysis first. One must start with analyses, that is, descriptions of facts, observations, data from positive science. There can be no philosophy without positive science. That is where one must start. The philosopher can never know enough. If he has not sufficiently assimilated the current state of science on certain points, it goes without saying he cannot assimilate the entire science. One must start from here, as with the painter, as Leonardo da Vinci when he painted the Mona Lisa after contemplating the model. One must look at the model. One can never look at it enough. That's where one must start. As I said earlier, it is not by taking measurements of the model and developing them on the canvas that one will succeed in making something good. And yet, if one starts from the idea one has formed, if one starts from intuition to make a portrait, one must still necessarily end up keeping these measurements on the canvas, otherwise the portrait will not be resembling. Thus, to philosophize, one must necessarily start from the analyses, the results of positive science. But at a given moment, when one has assimilated these results, one must, by a completely different effort, by a kind of saltus, a real leap, install oneself in what we call intuition and try, starting from this intuition, developing it to find the data of the analysis. If they are not found, one is in error. Philosophy that would limit itself, how shall I say, to starting intuitions with constantly testing them against the analysis, such philosophy would be pure fantasy. Philosophy never has any value, it seems, except on the condition of being always constantly verified in contact with positive science. Thus, with analyses, one will never make intuition, because intuition is something else entirely. But starting from intuitions, following them, developing them, one must find the data of the analysis. Otherwise, one is beside the truth, in fantasy, in dream, but not in true intuition. Bergson starts with three, I would say, vivid or lively images. Three images, and he proceeds to develop them into intuitions. The first is movement, the next is the mother, and the last is the artist. It's important to see that each image is already in excess beyond any representation or picture. Each implies our sympathy with the image as a sort of external interiority, if we can say that. It's an exterior interiority that we place ourselves in directly. The whole and reality of the image is immediately felt to exceed the given of the image. The reality of the image is not present, although it is somehow evident to us in the presented image that there is something more beyond it, in the same way that we found with motion. In Bergson's second image of the mother, he gives us some really key pieces of information that bring it to life, and bring to life this external interiority. There's this person, and they have a child, and they have cared for this child closely across the child's life, attended to them over the years of their development. The mother has an integral knowledge of this imaginary child, and this image that Bergson gives us, it does not present to us this integral knowledge that the mother has, but it intimates the possibility of it to us. And it asks us, in a way, to have that kind of knowledge and to reflect on the possibility of that kind of knowledge. We are not handed this complete infinity of details of this person's life or what they grasp in this integral intuition of their child, but the image suggests this. It suggests something that is beyond the image. And it can only become an intuition of an integral image when we each breathe life into it for ourselves and develop it alongside several other images. The image of movement, the first image he gives, is one that is in fact always involves several movements of different sorts and involves a sort of propagation of movements developing multiple images. So the first image is already multiple. It involves, of course, this movement that we are immediately perceiving, but it also involves a movement of our coming to realize the limits of our ability to capture movement in concepts and representation. There's a movement of realization of the insufficiency of the derivative and the symbolic. we begin a movement that seeks to surpass the artificial images that we use to capture movement. We only begin to do this, we only begin to surpass the artificial when we move for ourselves, when we are the motor, so to speak. A self-moving movement which neither merely imagines nor stands external to movement and watches it. A movement which makes itself in real time as it occurs. The image of movement is only complete if we are moving and experiencing the movement firsthand. So we must start moving, and that is how we develop this image. The derivative image is pure exteriority. It is us seeing an other and held at a distance from it as the viewer. This mode of attention is vitiated by the subjective judgments of experience and opinion. This is us in the world of signs, reducing our perceptual world to concepts and ideas and ways of anticipating and presiding over the world we perceive. The integral image, on the other hand, is not merely an interiority, but includes both the continuity and discontinuity of multiple durations that both involve each other and diverge from each other. Coexistence of different durations and durations at different degrees of tension. We are never fully in the integral image of something other than us, any more than we are ever fully actively the whole of all of our own moments of our past and our own duration. We are not ever actively every single moment of our existence representationally there, actual, all at once. So the question of how do we actually put ourselves in a duration other than our own is not one of saying, well, can we ever fully and completely get there? We never fully occupy an integral image, because that exact criteria of complete occupation is the criteria of derivative images and symbols. And this need to completely occupy an image all at once actually prevents us from appreciating the integrality and virtuality of images, and prevents us from sympathizing with the integral images. An intuition means that we form an image by first caring for a multiplicity of images. We cannot possess the integral image, but we develop a comradeship with it. And we must hone a craft of producing images born from this long comradeship. This is exemplified in Bergson's third image, the image of an artist. The image of the artist becomes fecund only if it is felt to be an inner creative energy that cares for integral images and learns to depict them through this long comradeship with them, and not by creating a symbol of them. The artist must paint the integral image of them such that it suggests and evokes this depth of inner life which no mere picture can contain. This must be the image of an artist as a movement of experience, a transformation of consciousness itself, moving from the multiplicity of observations to the unity of the intention of the work of creating a piece of art. So this is the new image of movement which we have developed from this original moving image to the mother to the artist. Now we have a new image of movement, or we could say the movement of our intuition of movement, right? If you like. Starting always with an image of movement, whether that's the growing up of the child or the movement of life painted by the artist, we must always develop the images into integral images of motion, where we understand it less as an exterior picture and more as a kind of living force that we have to be within and that we have to live out ourselves. We must not only begin to move and to sympathize and to create, but we must go to the sciences and we must form a comradeship with them. This is what Bergson's method of intuition as a philosophical method really consists of. all of this development of images that I have described here is at play in a novel effort that we must make ourselves to form a comradeship with science, science being the study of movements, the study of realities within nature that are in the process of moving. And in the same way that we must critique always our ability to conceptualize this movement and to capture it, we will do the same thing in the realm of science. And in the process, open ourselves to a deeper grasp of this movement as a duration that we can enter into through sympathy.